and welcome to the first ever technical episode of Downhill Smooth Tarmac. And we're kicking things off in a big old way. What you see next to me is a Specialized Turbo Vado SL, not just any, but mine. What I'm looking to do is, although this is a flat bar gravel bike I use for commuting, I've got an itch that I can't scratch, and that is to make it into a drop bar gravel bike. Now to do this, been on the scrounge, I've got some bits to see what we can do to make it work. I've got some 105 shifters, some flared gravel drops and some cable actuated flat mount brakes. Stick with us to see how it turns out. Okay, let's crack on with this Specialized Turbo conversion. Before we get started, first thing I'm going to do is get that range extender battery out. Don't need that in the way. And also remove the Garmin mount that also holds the light on this particular bike because I've got the shock stem instead of the Specialized one. Next up, those lock-on grips, they're coming off. Won't be needing those now we're going for a drop bar. Loosen the Allen key bolt that holds the lock on. Slide those off. I'm also going to remove the brake levers and the gear shifter. Because of the width of the bars, I'm just going to loosen these for a start so that they're able to come off, but I won't be able to pull them off just yet. So we'll take the faceplate off the stem because we're changing anyway and get those off the bars. I'm also going to remove the front and rear wheel from the frame because those hydro brakes are coming out. Just gives me better access and also minimises the risk, being as we're removing lines, of getting any kind of cross contamination onto those rotors because we are going to reuse those in the build with the cable brakes. So, getting this front caliper off, undo the bolts and unscrew it. Going for the front first purely because I'm not looking forward to removing the motor. As you can see, I use an 8mm spanner to remove the caliper from the line. So the time has come for the motor to be removed. You can see it's held in by 3 Torx bolts on either side. They do come out with ease, although they are quite tight. When it comes to the drive side, the chainring has to be removed to allow access to the middle bolt. Now, as much as I don't like turning a bike upside down to work on it, I do this to remove the motor bash guard and find it's easier for the motor removal for the bike to be upside down. Now, when you look at the motor, you can see that I could leave the 2 rear bolts in place. They would allow us to pivot the motor, but in essence, we need full access here. So it's going to be easier to take the bolts out and remove the motor. A nice surprise is that the plugs are very similar to a Bafang mid-drive and they can be unplugged, meaning that the motor can actually be removed and put safely out of the way. Finally, it's time for that rear caliper to come out, so I undo that while it's upside down as well. At this point I made the decision to actually just snip the hydro lines. I'm not going to use those brakes again, they're pretty tonk, so there's no point messing about with the olives and the nuts on them. Snip them, get them gone. So when I pull the line, I leave an old red line gear cable through the frame to allow me to route the new cable when the time comes. Onto the bars now, get those flared drops on, looking decent with some 105 shifters. Bolt them back onto the stem, just as you did when you removed the carbon flat bar really. Very simple, and make sure that you torque up your stem bolts appropriately. Next, let's get those new cable calipers put in place using the same adapter plates as the old hydros to make sure that they will work with the existing rotors. We're using a 160mm rotor front and rear just for information. Again, fit up the front one and the back one. They're both front and rear specific, being flat mount. Then it's time to stick that 105 rear mech in place. Now, because we're going to run 1142, we're going to have a drop link as well, which you should be able to see in the frame. If you're not familiar with a drop link, it basically lowers the derailleur so that you can run a wide range cassette with a mid-range or short range derailleur. Screws on before you put your derailleur on. You can see there, very simple, the derailleur now fits underneath onto the drop link. Finally for today, let's get the wheels back in. I've swapped the cassette over to the new 10 speed 1142 tooth cassette, and there we have it. Okay, so as you can see, we've got the wheels back on, new cassette is on, calipers are in place, and that is where we're going to have to stop for today. Got to wait for some other parts to arrive so we can get those brakes all tuned in, a few other little bits. Everything else is back on in place. I think I've come up with a really neat solution for the power control for the motor. Obviously these are road levers, so the diameter is greater, need 22.2. I think I've got a solution for that little bad boy, so we'll see what happens later on in the video. Okay, so it's actually been a couple of days since we stopped the Specialized Turbo Vado SL build due to not having the right cables that we needed. We're now back in the workshop. As you can probably tell by my breath, it's absolutely freezing. We're back in a cold spell here in the UK, but not to worry, the heater is on and warming up. We're going to crack on with the build. We've got the parts we need, including cables and outers. Dave's shown up, gone for a bit of a green, going to go with the green of the bike. It's not to everyone's taste. If you don't like it, doesn't matter, it's not your bike, it's mine. We're going to get that done, we're going to get the motor back in, get the brakes all set up, and hopefully come back with another test ride video later on. In the meantime, on with the build. Okay, first job, let's get this internally routed brake cable sorted. As you can see, I've attached it to the gear cable that I used as my guide. You can buy kits for this. I find this works just fine with a little bit of tape just to hold it in place, a little bit of insulation tape. It's a bit bodgery, but it works just fine. The internal routing on this bike isn't too bad, and you can see it comes through pretty easily. There it is, through the middle section where the motor would go, and you'll see it comes through shortly, straight in to the brake line. Leave a bit extra here just so you can allow adjustments for when the brake's set up. Snip it at the handlebars and then move on to do the front one. The front you don't need a guide for, it's pretty easy on the Vado, it'll come straight through. Next up, run a brake cable to the front and rear brake. Get your outers in place, take them to the bars, and that's the brake cables done for the time being. Don't forget the appropriate cable ends to your outers where required. Just make sure you take that up nice and tight and that the routing is all correct. And next up, it's going to be time to get that bike upside down and fit the motor. Here we go. Right, so putting the motor back in is pretty much the same as removing it, but in reverse. Don't forget, you might see in the frame there's a little guide that holds the gear and brake cable. Make sure you screw that back in, it keeps it all clear of the motor. Makes life much easier. Don't be alarmed, when you come to put this back in, you may find that A, the connector wires are a touch fiddly, especially if you're freezing cold like me, and it will need a bit of coercion to go back into the frame. It's a tight fit and that's how it should be. You will have to give it a little bit of welly just to get it where it needs to go, but don't be shy with it, it'll be fine. There you go. Right, next thing, put your bolts in, torque them up on both sides. You'll find all the settings for the torquing up on Specialized website should you need any guidance with that. Once they're all torqued up, the only other thing we have to do while it's upside down is make sure that we refit the bash guard. This is held on by a single bolt. It clips in either side of the motor. Just be careful of that because it can slip where it goes and you'll end up just expanding it till it cracks, and you don't want that. So there we go, just pop that guard on and the bike is pretty much ready to go back in the stand. Okay, so as you can see, I've refitted the chainring as well and put the chain back on. It's now time to adjust up all of that gearing. Okay, so you can see I've got the wide range cassette in place, derailleur is there ready to go. So next thing you've got to do is the top and bottom limits on the derailleur. These are done with the adjuster screws. It's pretty straightforward, and as you'll see, all you need to do is make sure that using your thumb on the derailleur, you go up to the 42 and it doesn't go over into the wheel, down to the bottom and it doesn't drop off the block. Once you've done that, you are good to go to get that cable connected and index the bike. So here we go with that. Easy peasy. pull the cable through, but before you do, just undo the derailleur adjustment screw, just a couple of turns anti-clockwise to give you a bit of leeway either way when it comes to indexing up that bad boy. Okay, so hold the cable tight through the bolt, tighten it up, and you're ready to start indexing. You do this, spin the wheel, having clicked the gear once upwards on the shifter. You're looking for it to jump up. If it doesn't, undo the adjuster screw more until it does. Once it starts jumping from the bottom cog to one up, work your way up and down the block, make sure it's working. Okay, so it's on to setting up these brakes. We'll start with the rear. Now, some people think setting up cable disc brakes is some kind of dark art. It's really not, especially not with a single piston. First thing I like to use is one of these little adjuster plates. People think these are a bit gimmicky when they see them come free with brake pads on Amazon, but actually they're a piece of brilliance. You slot it over the rotor and in between the rotor and the pads. This allows you to align the non-moving pad on the inside of the caliper. Once that's up against the shim, you can tighten up the bolts and lock the caliper in place. These should be nice and tight, but don't go mad. There you go. With that shim removed, you should find that your wheel spins absolutely freely. If there's any resistance, readjust. Next, run the cable through and it's time to adjust the brake. All I do is I put the brake fully on, let it back a tiny amount, and then tighten it up with the bolt. Easy peasy. Dead simple. Check it's still moving freely. Any resistance, we don't want that, we're losing watts. Now, check it at the front. This is really important for your safety. Have a good pull on the brake, make sure it works, it feels solid. Also make sure that you can get a finger in between the lever and the bar. Front brakey, that's exactly the same. Repeat the process. Again, we want it free flowing, we want it rotating easily, we want good lever feel. Most importantly, we don't want it to rub. Watch as this stops now and rolls backwards. It's free moving. Done. So, I mentioned I had a solution for the power adjuster that sits on the Vado's flat bars, and here it is. A simple accessory mount from Amazon. Cut it down, put it on the bar there. It's easy to access from the thumb. Personally, dead pleased with that. All that's left to do now is wrap your bars. Wrap them any which way that suits you. If you're used to doing this, you'll find it's really easy. One thing I don't use is the little cut strip behind the levers. I like a double wrap. Wrap it up, tape it up, and that's your bike ready for a test ride, which means in this video it's time for one thing and one thing only, and that's to bring on the glorious after build finished bike montage. Let's take a look at it. And there you have it. Fresh, covered in mud from the test ride, complete, and I think looking excellent. If you've enjoyed this video, found it useful, we simply like gravel and e-bike shenanigans, feel free to like and subscribe to Downhill Smooth Tarmac. I've got many more videos planned, some technical, some adventures, some just plain daft. But if you like what you've seen, please, it means a lot to us if you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.